Colleagues, staff and gallery, as is our custom at council meetings, we have the privilege to welcome and introduce two members of London's very own alternative folk pop group, The Pears. Noel and Renee Coughlin are two of the three classically trained vocalists who paired up with a former punk rock drummer, I can't make this up, to create their unique blend of harmony and rhythm. With three unique songwriters at the helm, The Pears create a diverse repertoire using their individual lives as their inspiration. I'd ask you all now, colleagues, to stand and staff to stand as you join me in singing the national anthem and welcoming Noel and Renee of The Pears. Please come forward.
Hello. Ready? Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Take a quick ride and give another three of these. Yeah, no. Happy to picture. And it's going to probably close. I'm fairly uncomfortable. Ladies and gentlemen, Renee and Noel. Thank you. Now, I must admit, we've never asked Councillor Hillier to do that, but there's always time. I will first start by reading out the statement with respect to accessibility. The City of London is committed to making effort to provide alternative formats and communication supports to council, for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Colleagues, the council will break for dinner at approximately 6:30 p.m. as required, unless we end at 6:29, of course. I will look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. There are no recognitions that I've been made aware of, nor confidential matters to be considered in public. Therefore, I will look for a motion for council to move into closed session. Moved by Councillor Van Meerbergen, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Any comments or questions as I turn your attention to the screen?
Counselor Van Holst. Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-0.
Thank you. I will ask colleagues to move into Committee Room 3, please. Colleagues, I'll turn your attention to item 5 on the agenda, confirmation and signing of the minutes of the previous meeting, the 11th meeting held on May 7th. Is there a mover? Councillor Lehman, seconded by Councillor Deputy Mayor Helmer. Any comments or questions? Then I'll turn your attention to the screen, please.
Councillor Van Holst? Councillor Van Holst is indicating a yay. Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-0.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I'll turn your attention to item 6. We have had 3 communications, one from B. Brock with respect to the area speed limit, the second from M. Powell, F. Galloway, and G. Playford from the London Community Foundation with respect to the One River Master Plan Environmental Assessment, and from P. Nanavati regarding request for demolition at 123 Queens Avenue. I'd look for a motion to accept these communications. Councillor Kayabauga, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Any comments or questions? Then let me turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-0.
Thank you. There are no motions. There are no motions to which notice is given. So I'll turn your attention to report 8.1, the 9th report of the Planning Environment Committee. Councillor Hopkins, if you would, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to present the 9th meeting of the Planning and Environmental Committee. I have not been approached by anyone to pull any of the items, so I will be putting all the items on the floor. I would like to make a couple comments. It was, we did a lot of work at planning. It was a long meeting, but we had 9 public participation meetings. One of the public participation meetings, 3.6, which was the demolition request for heritage designation at 123 Queens Avenue, we did refer that back to a future meeting of PEC to allow for some structural assessment of the building. We heard a number of concerns. So with the public participation meetings, like I said, there were 9. The consent items, the rethink zoning terms of reference approving, I think I just want my colleagues to be aware that we are undertaking the process to prepare for a new zoning bylaw. Obviously, you know, the London plan was endorsed by council in 2016, and therefore we have to change the bylaws to accommodate the new London plan, and that's going to take probably a year or 2. So we're going to start the consultation phase and then moving forward with the writing of the bylaw. So with that, I would like to put all the items on the floor.
So noted. Councillor Square, you had a comment?
If I could just speak to number 17, which was this public site plan meeting of 112 St. James Street. The reason I wanted to speak to this because I think it's an excellent example of a community, a developer, and our staff working together on intensification. So although it may not have been obvious to many, people in North London accepted and asked for just a few changes on what was essentially a 13-story building in the middle of North London, part of North London. Their concerns were about particular design elements of the building, but it's a really good example of people working together and sort of not coming forward and creating all kinds of reasons why they don't want infill, but bringing forward all kinds of reasons why they were accepting of infill. And so just again, it's a 13-story residential building that's going to be in North London. I'm quite pleased with the way The Community Association, the St. George Grosvenor Community Association dealt with the entire issue.
Thank you, Councillor Squire. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, and I'm not sure whether the chair of the committee may be able to answer this or whether she may want to get staff to comment. I'm just wondering with 123 Queens, when that's anticipated to come back before PEC. I certainly understand that, you know, Heritage wants to see that there's a heritage designation there, but I also understand the community safety concerns. And I'd hate to see this be something that we don't see for, you know, 6 or 8 months or so. When would we expect that back?
Councillor Hopkins.
I understand that we have a PEC meeting on May the 27th, as well as the first week of June. I think it's the 4th or something. It could be either of those meetings, and then eventually both going to the council meeting. I understand the sooner the better.
Councillor Squire, did you wish to add on this issue? Yeah, please proceed.
Just to provide additional information, I was actually contacted by the applicant on Friday, I believe, and they are asking for a further period of time, which may take it into July. Reason being is their engineer is just not available, and so they're fully involved in the process, and I think they're quite understanding of where they have to go, but they actually need a little more time. That's what they conveyed to me.
Any other comments or questions for Councillor Hopkins? Seeing none, then, excuse me, Councillor Morgan.
Yes, my apologies for arriving late. I see that the entire planning report is on the agenda. If council would indulge me, I would like to vote separately on item 16, if that's possible, which is the 2096 Wonderland Road North.
So we will pull item 16, 2096 Wonderland Road North as a separate call to council. Any other comments or questions? So we are voting on 1 through 16 and 18 as I turn your attention to the screen.
Councillor Van Holst. Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins.
Your Worship, I think we have another item, number 16.
Then colleagues, I actually gave you the number count wrong. It was 1 through 15, 17 through 18. Clerk, are we accepting of that? Because I did give the information incorrectly.
We had it correct.
You had it correct. It's always wise to have a wise clerk, I've always found. Thank you. As we now open up item 16 for any comments or discussion. Seeing none, then I will turn your attention to the screen as we vote on item 16 as per the clerk's wise counsel.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-1.
Back to the chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Now the 8.2, the 12th report of the Corporate Services Committee. I would have preferred Councillor Kayabaga, but we have Councillor Morgan here, so why don't we let you proceed if you don't mind?
I feel the same way, actually. But it was a short meeting. It was about, I think, 12 minutes. So I'd be happy to put all 3 items on the floor. Oh, I got an amendment, actually. I got an amendment sheet. Yeah, this is what happens when you arrive late. I have to do clause 2.1 separate, so I can do 1 and 3. together.
Thank you. Any comments or questions with respect to 1.1 and 3? See none, I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Councillor Kadenbach, thank you. Closing the vote, and the motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I'll put 2.1 on the floor. Once it's on the floor, I would propose the amendment that was circulated on the amendment sheet.
So noted. Any comments or questions? Then I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote. Councillor Helmer?
Need a second.
Just seconding if you need one.
Thank you very much. Seconded by Councillor Helmer. Comments or questions? I'll return your attention to the screen.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan.
Main motion.
As
So now the main motion is moved. Comments or questions
need a second.
with the seconder? Require a seconder, please. Councillor Hopkins, thank you. Comments or questions? So we're now voting on the main motion. I turn your attention to the screen.
Councillor Squire? Closing the vote, and the motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. We now have 8.3, the ninth report of the Civic Works Committee. Councillor Squire.
I've been asked to pull item 210, which is item number 12, the Greenway wastewater. Nothing else yet, but
Does anyone else wish anything for discussion? Councillor Helmer.
oh, I'm sorry.
13, the One River Master Plan environmental update, so 3.1.
That's 12 and 13. Any other items to be pulled for separate consideration? Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you. If we could pull number 10, please.
So noted. Any other items to be reviewed separately? Seeing none, then we are considering 1 through 9, 11, and 14. As
I'll move that.
Moved by Councillor Squire. Thank you.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 14-0.
Councillor Squire.
Item 10, 2.6 is the area speed limit. There, just so the so council knows, The staff recommendation was augmented slightly by three more specific items that came from Councillor Cassidy's letter, and the committee voted in favor of that 4-1. I just want to point out that no particular decision to change speed limits, do anything like that, was made at the committee. It's just been sent to staff for further public participation meeting on that particular issue. So I hope that focuses things a little bit.
That is helpful. Thank you, Councillor Squire. Comments or questions? Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you to the Chair, Councillor Squire, for clarifying that. As we know, this will be a report that will be coming back. But as we also know, so many areas in London suffer from basically slow arterials and fast neighborhood roads. So I think the effort to look at area speed limits and reducing those limits makes a lot of sense in the neighborhood, obviously not on the arterial. But anything we can do to slow down the neighborhood speed and try to eliminate as much as possible cut through is a positive development. And by the same token, raising the speed on the arterial roadway. That in and of itself will help in terms of cut through, which so many neighborhoods suffer from. So I think this is a very positive direction. We look forward to the report coming back. But I also wanted to make a point about the automated speed enforcement, or ASE. I would assume that is referring to automated cameras, photo radar. Would that be just asking staff?
Question of staff, Mr. Mathers?
So that would be, I'm sorry.
Through your worship, yes, that is photo radar.
Councillor Van Meerbergen?
I would just make the point that we keep in mind maybe a low-tech, much cheaper option, and that is perhaps appropriately applied speed humps in school zones, as opposed to what I can only assume to be very expensive equipment for all the schools in the City of London. So when that time comes, I hope we do take a judicious look at the low-tech, cheaper option.
Councillor Squire, is it fair through you to ask staff that all these items will be there for consideration?
That's very fair, that everything's on the table, nothing's off the table, but we're awaiting the process. And there will be a public participation meeting, so I just caution too many conclusions at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I want to rise just briefly to draw colleagues' attention to the fact that at Civic Works, we also received from administration updated guidelines for traffic calming policies, which will in fact exempt school zones from an evaluation process. School zones will automatically be eligible. So there are multiple tools on the table to be considered when this eventually comes back to us after we've consulted with the public.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just for clarification, I appreciate Councillor Van Meerbergen's comments, but I wanted to make sure that we aren't looking at increasing speed on our arterial roads through you to staff. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Again, I gather through Councillor Squire that all options are on the table. I think you've made that clear.
I thought I answered it, but...
I think that's been answered, Councillor Hopkins. Any other questions you have?
I assume all options are on the floor then?
Councillor Squire, please.
No particular speed limit came out of any of the recommendations. There's nothing yet on the table, and any preferences will be at the end of that process. So nothing right now, as far as I know through staff, has been decided.
Did you have another question then, Councillor Hopkins? Councillor Hopkins, I know you sat, but do you have any other? You're good? Thank you. Councillor Kayabag then, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know that he just clarified that there's nothing that's been proposed yet, but we're looking into having a report come back to us. But will it be fair to, because we're looking at neighborhoods, if I wanted to add maybe looking at downtown, specific streets such as King Street or all the one-way streets to also be included in reducing the speed limit, would that be fair to add into it, or is that already, is that going to be a component that's part of it as well? And I'm sorry for this question over and over again, but we just want to make sure that we don't have to go back over this again.
Councillor Squire?
As far as I know, there's nothing to prevent that being considered as part of the process. I don't think it needs to be added in. Staff's heard certainly what you've said. I don't see a problem with that.
So noted. Any other comments? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just as a quick comment, since this hit the media a couple of weeks ago, there's been a fair amount of discussion. I think there's, as councillors, we know quite well how much inquiries we have about how do I get traffic calming on my neighborhood, and how do I adjust the speed within the neighborhood as well. Comments that I've received so far have been incredibly strong, supportive of investigating this direction, and I'm glad that we're moving forward with some public participation to get some good feedback. I hope that people are commenting and reaching out to all of my colleagues as well. I'd imagine they have been. And usually when I might be heard in the media, half the city will say Steve's nuts and the other half will say right on. This one balances a little more towards the let's go with this. So thank you for bringing this forward to staff, and thank you to the committee for recommending this for approval by council.
Councillor Squire, I noticed he didn't say which Steve, so.
I would like to comment on whether he's nuts or not.
Any other comments or questions for the chairman? Moved by Councillor Squire. We'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Councillor Helmer? Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, Councillor Squire.
Item number 12 is the Greenway Wastewater Treatment Plant Organic Rankine Cycle. And it was a consent matter at committee, but I know Councillor Van Holst wanted it pulled, so there it is.
Councillor Van Holst?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I had a little concern about this item, so I went and took a tour of the Greenway plant to see some of the other investments we've made in this area. Some of them are very strong investments in terms of payback. So probably the astounding one, it's referenced here, by increasing the temperature at which we burn the sludge, by essentially just adding a little more sludge. There's no cost to us. We can cut down 20,000 tons a year of greenhouse gases, mostly nitrous oxides, which are definitely a pollutant. So that's a tremendous investment. One that was recent, we put some high efficiency blowers in. They cost $2.4 million. And those gave us some savings in terms of electricity of $598,000. So essentially the same savings that we're getting from this project. So around $600,000 a year from $2.4 million estimate. So a total project cost. So that works out to about a 4-year payback. This particular project was a very a long payback, and I'm concerned about that, especially since we've declared a climate emergency. So when we're making investments, I think it's good for us to have ones that pay back quickly, so that we can make other investments that also bring us the kinds of operational savings that we see with the blowers. When I asked staff a little further, if you put the total of the project, all the project fees together, it's about 17 or $18 million, and the payback would be around 23 years. The expected, or the minimum life of the project is 20 years, but now we're getting into a position where we're investing in a project where the life is shorter than the payback. And so I wonder if this is the direction we should be going. However, there's still value to it. I'm not sure if I'm going to support this one, because I think we need to be going with projects where they pay off sooner, and then we can use those funds to fund other projects as well. The one thing I would like to do is suggest a point B, or an added part B to this, where we direct our civic administration to report back to us with a set of best practices for analyzing these kinds of investments, where we're putting some money up front and we're getting an income stream later. What is a good way to do this? Should it pay off in a certain number of years, 7, or should it be relative to the lifetime of the project? Maybe half the project life. So some guidelines for us to look at, even in terms of the climate outcomes. This one, we could spend a similar amount of money on, say, solar panels, and instead of getting 3.75 gigawatt hours a year in savings, it would be 6. We'd essentially make 60% more money as well, so that'd be about $960,000 a year we could make on a different investment. So there's always the opportunity to look at, is there something else could get us a bigger gain? And in terms of greenhouse gases in this one, we'd be much better off if we made an investment that we'd be better off if we made an investment that got rid of fossil fuel use instead of electricity use, because although we're saving $600,000 in electricity a year, electricity in Ontario is 90% emission-free. So we're not really making great gains in terms of savings on greenhouse gases here. So there's my concerns about this investment. I don't think I'm going to support it, but I would like to put on the floor this Part B. I did send it to staff, so we can maybe in the future have a better look at these kinds of things.
So noted. I believe that would be D, just for colleagues'
Okay.
benefit. And are you moving that then, Councillor Van Holst?
I would like to, yes.
Is there a seconder for that?
So the motion is civic administration be directed to report back with a set of best practices for the financial analysis of projects anticipated to generate future savings, but requiring an upfront expenditure of capital.
So noted. Is there a seconder for that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I see no seconder. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? So moved by Councillor Squire. I will turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 13-1.
Councillor Squire.
The final matter that was pulled was item 13, 3.1, which is the One River Master Plan Environmental Assessment Notice of Completion. Just a reminder that we're not deciding tonight which parts, or if any parts, we are going to proceed with out of these series of recommendations. That will be a decision that we made part of the budget process. However, there were 2 additions made to the staff recommendation. The first was that alternative 2 for the Back to the River project, which is the one recommended by staff, would also have an additional business plan that removes the suspension bridge project from any further planning, development, or funding. Again, that was added so that there will be a business case presented on that, but again, it'll be up to council through the budget process to decide which of those alternatives are going to be completed. I should point out that to remove this or any part of the Back to the River project or change it in ways that don't affect the EA would not require another EA. And this particular aspect, if it was removed, my understanding is it would not require another environmental assessment. So that was one change that was made by committee. The second change that was made by committee is committee also asked that a business case be included for the full decommissioning and removal of the dam, which would cost significantly more, obviously, than a partial decommissioning. My understanding of that change is it would require some changes to the EA. In other words, we couldn't proceed under the same EA to complete that project. So there were two changes. None of this has been decided nor was decided. I would just caution against entering into a whole new debate about what we think about Back to the River. That will remain for another day. What was added at the last meeting were two further alternatives.
That's helpful. Thank you, Councillor Squire. Any other comments or questions with respect to this? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. In the spirit of having further discussions about it, I was at the meeting, and unfortunately, you know, the initial discussion was about the EA, and then we branched off into a variety of other related topics. And there were a number of members of council who were there, I think, attending to see about the speed limit issue, and then also this item. And we ended up talking about sort of a budget discussion at the committee. And so, you know, the chair was trying to keep the members who are not, you know, not actually members of the committee in line, which I appreciated. I would like to suggest that we refer that particular one to SPPC. I think that's part of the problem, was we were having a discussion at Civic Works about a business case for the multi-year budget. I think there were people there who wanted to talk about that issue specifically. And so I'm going to suggest we do that with part two. We just refer that to SPPC. Everyone can weigh in on what they think about the business case. I think we should focus, as Councillor Squire suggested in his opening remarks, really about the EA, which is what's before us from the Civic Works Committee and from staff, and have the SPPC discussion about the business case. So I'll move referral of part two of C, and maybe there's support for that.
Seconder? Lots. Councillor Van Holst. Comments or questions with respect to the referral of part two? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I too was at the Civic Committee, and I do think this was a budget conversation that was happening. It should be referred to SPPC, so I'd be happy to second that, the motion to do so. We already know that we are going to be going through the budget process, and those decisions can be had at that time, but I do think the conversation should go to SPPC. It's the committee of the whole. That's where the conversation should take place, not at Civic.
Thank you. Actually, and I appreciate your comments. We have, Councillor Van Holst has seconded it already, but thank you for that. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I will just, through you to my colleagues, encourage you to defeat this referral. All we're asking staff to do is bring two options forward at budget time. By bringing it to SPPC and asking staff to do more work to, again, bring options forward in the budget, we're simply asking staff to duplicate work that's already been asked of them to do. I realize that there are supporters of this project and opponents of this project, both the suspension bridge as well as the dam, with different opinions. We're not here to have that discussion tonight. All that has happened is a request for two options to come back in the multi-year budget process, rather than just a single option, which was what was originally in. So for colleagues to suggest that we should reduce our options at budget time by referring this for more staff work, I just think it's really, at the end of the day, we're just rehashing a discussion that we've already had for the sake of taking up more time on this. I just want to see both options come forward. So I'm asking colleagues to just defeat this. Let's go with the committee recommendation. Let staff prepare the two business cases, and then we will have a robust debate on this when it comes to budget time.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Did you wish to wrap on that, Councillor Helmer? That was your amendment? No? Seeing no other comments or questions, then I will turn your attention to the screen as we vote on the amendment.
Closing the vote, and the motion is lost on a tie, 7-7.
Thank you. Councillor Squire. The motion's been moved. Any comments or questions? I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Sorry, I thought it might be obvious, but I would like to vote on that separately if it's going to be.
Through Mr. Mayor, you'll just have to give us a few minutes. We had opened the vote, so we'll need to cancel it and repost.
So if you voted already, here's your chance to consider and reconsider and then some more. For clarity, I will ask the clerk to read exactly what we're voting on as it relates to C2, I believe it is. Clerk, please.
Through Mr. Mayor, the motion that is on the floor is that the following actions be taken with respect to preferred alternate 2 for the Back to the River inaugural project as outlined in the above noted. And the portion of that part C that's on the floor is 2, which is the civic administration be directed to develop an additional business plan for the multi-year budget process that removes the suspension bridge project included in the above noted alternative 2 from any further planning, development, or funding.
Comments or questions? Councillor Van Holst, did you have a question? I saw your hand up a moment ago. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Then let me turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Councillor Kayaba. Closing the vote and the motion carries 10-4.
Councillor Squire.
Balance of that thought.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's right. So the balance of that item is before you now, moved by Councillor Squire. Any other comments or questions? This is for the EA review with all its machinations. Seeing none, I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Counselor Hopkins, Counselor Morgan, Counselor Helmer. Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Councillor Kayabага.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to ask for a reconsideration of vote on the prior amendment that we made. I confused it. Thanks.
There's been a request for reconsideration of vote on the entire,
C2.
on C2. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Pelosi, any comments or questions on voting for reconsideration? Then I'll even ask Councillor Squire in a moment just to reconfirm what it is exactly we're voting on, so I'll give you a moment to review that, please. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, this is a vote for reconsideration, moved and seconded.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 14-0.
Councillor Squire, we are now looking for a motion, please.
The motion that will now be on the floor, and I'll move it, is that C2 will now be on the floor, and we voted on that earlier, and it's now been reconsidered. So we'll be voting on that, which is the original, no? Yes. Oh, when people shake their heads at me, which is the original committee recommendation. I'm used to people shaking their heads at me.
It has been duly put forward for reconsideration, and I will ask if there's any comments or questions. Then I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 9-5.
Thank you.
That's it now. We did approve the balance.
Yes, we did.
Down now?
You can sit down.
Thank you.
Please. Thanks very much, Councillor Squire. 8.4 is the 13th report of the SPPC meeting. Deputy Mayor Helmer, please.
I'm going to try and put the entire report on the floor. This is from 15 days ago, so hopefully everyone remembers what we discussed.
Thank you. Moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer. Councillor Squire?
If you could remove 4.1B. I voted against it at that meeting. I just want to vote against it again. Be consistent.
Councillor Morgan?
Yes, 4.1F, I'd like to vote on separately. I'd like to suggest an amendment to it.
I'm wondering if it makes sense just to take out 4.1 in its entirety, or 4, I'm sorry, the whole issues around the development charge bylaw? Around the, excuse me, around the, can we just take out 4.1 and deal with that separately, and then we can subdivide it appropriately at that time? That just might make it a little bit simpler. Are you good with that, Mr. Squire? Councilor Morgan, are you good with that? Okay, so we're going to pull 4.1, the 2023 multi-year budget. Any other items to be reviewed separately? Seeing none, there is a motion on the floor. I'll call your attention to the screen, please.
Councillor Morgan? Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Deputy Mayor Hummer.
Put 4.1 on the floor with the exception of the two that Councillor Squire and Councillor Morgan wanted pulled separately.
Are we comfortable for 4.1B, 4.1F to be removed? Any other for separate consideration? Any other discussion? Let's deal with 4.1B, and then what we will do is, as we've dealt with these two issues, then we'll come back if you're comfortable, Deputy Mayor, and then we'll deal with the whole bill or the whole item as it stands. So 4.1B, any comments or questions? Then I will turn your attention to the screen as we call the question.
Councillor Van Holst, Councillor Lewis, Councillor Kayalaga. Councillor Squire?
We're just voting on B.
Yes. Closing the vote and the motion carries 10-4.
Deputy Mayor Hummer.
Well, I think F was the one that Councillor Morgan wanted to pull, so why don't we put that one on the floor and see if he has an amendment?
Councillor Morgan.
Yes, in consultation, after reviewing the meeting and in consultation with the city manager and treasurer, I think the language in F is a little bit confusing with what the actual intent is. If you recall, this is Councillor Kayabaga's motion at the meeting to add a process for what is described as service reviews, but the city manager made it very clear during the meeting is that what we're talking about is service reduction or elimination. And we may or may not do that, but that's actually what the purpose of the meeting is to talk about. That's what is going to be brought forward. And so I think we should amend the language to be very clear. I know some people voted for, some people would vote against, but I think let's be clear about what the meeting is actually about, so that there's no surprise when that's what comes forward from our staff as part of the discussion process, and we will set directions. So I would suggest that reviews be struck and reduction or elimination be added, so that a matter of service reduction or elimination for specific services be added to a future agenda of SPPC and carry on from there. That would be my specific amendment, if there's a seconder.
Seconded by Councillor Lewis. Comments or questions? Any further comments or questions? Councillor Squire.
I won't be supporting the amendment. The wording means a lot to me. I think when people start talking about service elimination and reduction, it sends out a message that we're going to be taking away things that people have now that they still want and need. And I don't think that's what we're looking at all. We're looking at things that are no longer essential to the function that we're doing at the City of London. And I don't want the language out there that I support to be saying, well, we're eliminating services that may be of some value to people. I think a service review is perfectly acceptable language. I think that's what we'll be doing, and I'd like to stick with that language. And quite frankly, that was council's decision. That's a decision we made. And that was the language we chose. And I'm a little hesitant to say, well, staff's going to change our language. I don't think that's something I'm comfortable with.
Noted. Other comments or questions? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Sure. So I'm not going to support the amendment, largely because of the same reason I didn't support the initial motion, which is I understood what it meant, and it's what at least my understanding of what it meant is what Councillor Morgan is talking about, which is what of these things you want to stop doing. And I don't think these open-ended requests to say, go look at everything and come back with all the things you'd like to stop doing, I don't want to do that. So I think the service review process we have underway right now is a good process. I support that, and I think that that's a good way of finding savings, improving things. I think that the processes we have for that, the variety of things that the staff are doing already are appropriate. I understand if other people think there are things that we should just get out of entirely. I gave an example of something where I'd like to back out of it partially. It's not a total service reduction, it's more of a source of financing change at the meeting. I don't think this is necessary to do that, so I'm not going to support this particular change, although I agree with where Councillor Morgan is coming from. I think it's important that we're clear what we're doing, what we're not doing with this particular motion.
Any other comments or questions, colleagues? Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, Your Worship. I have a question through you to Councillor Kayabага. I believe that this motion was just to create an opportunity for council to have the discussion about what items we might want to back out of and remove and consider removing. And so it's not so much a process we're putting staff through, but an opportunity for us. And through you to the councillor, if she could confirm that was the intent, I would be happy to support either this as it stands or the amendment.
Councillor Kayabага, do you wish to comment to that, or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to respond to your comment, I think that I was going from the direction that staff was asking to get. They were asking to get this type of direction, and which is what we provided them with. And I'm super happy with the language that we have right now, and I will not be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will be supporting this amendment because I think it is important that we are providing staff clear direction, and they've indicated some suggestions to us that they think will help them provide that direction coming through the multi-year budget process. I think that there are things that we may want to look at. We may not decide to do them. We may decide to leave the status quo, but I think that there are things we may want to look at phasing out or reducing in certain areas. I mean, I could give examples too. Councillor Helmer gave one when this came before committee, but I think that it's the opportunity for staff to come back to us with some direction in that regard. Through our strategic planning process, we gave staff some direction on things we would like to see done, some new things that we would like to see done. This is an opportunity to say to them, are there things that we are doing right now that we may wish to reduce or phase out over the course of the next 4 years? And I think it's important that we give them both the direction we want to take forward in terms of adding new things, taking on new projects, as well as areas where there's opportunities to reduce. So I appreciate the input that they've given to our multi-year budget chair, and I will be supporting this, and I hope my colleagues will as well.
As I call on Councillor Kayabага, I know she's responded to a question, but it was in response to a councillor's question. Councillor Kayabага.
So it's my understanding that there was already like a review that was already happening, and staff was looking for us to direct them to continue on that path. Just a question through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. Do you specifically need that language on removing or and I'm going to ask either the manager or the treasurer, because I had this conversation with you actually, where we talked about the direction that staff was looking to get from this. And it was my understanding that the language that we provided was good. So is this something that you absolutely need, or the service review that was already underway is enough to continue moving forward to review the services that we're currently offering?
Staff, Ms. Barbone, do you wish to take that?
Thank you, through the chair. We have started through the process of looking at our current service reviews. So to clarify what the councillor is saying is we are doing 3 service reviews right now that are already initiated and in progress. So we are looking at housing, we're looking at golf courses, and we're looking at the our user fees in general. And so essentially, when we come, and housing, sorry, I missed out. When we go through all of that process, those will be coming forward through the multi-year budget process. So we don't need direction to continue those. When those are completed, those will be brought forward. If there are other areas that council wishes us to look at, that's where we don't have the direction, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Hayward, who can speak to the rest of it.
Mr. Hayward.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. So the subject of service reviews came up, and we wanted to make sure there was clarity that if council wanted us to reduce costs, and that's, I believe, where the thrust of it was going, that I indicated that basically, instead of having everybody get a haircut or a trim, that you'll be pulling the hair out by the roots in order to eliminate service or take it right out, so that you're taking the cost right out of the structure moving forward. That was the context of what I said at the meeting in front of council, just to clarify something Councillor Squire indicated. I wasn't trying to change the words of council, but we were looking for clarity, and I believe council indicated that they wanted clarity on that. So that's what we brought, and that was with Ms. Barban and I bringing that forward so that you would understand what we would be looking at. And I think the wording change that has been suggested actually does clarify that from my perspective. Obviously, the wording is council's wording, so you get to say whatever you want and pass the resolution whatever way you want. But from our perspective, that was what was needed to reduce the budget, because you've got to eliminate expenditures, and that means cutting service.
Pardon me, Councillor Kaibaga, just some clarification, Mr. Hayward, with what you said. Were you suggesting that the wording as presented in front of us earlier initially brings that clarity, or what Councillor Morgan has suggested? This would be helpful if you could just respond to that, and then I'll recognize back to Councillor Kaibaga, please.
So again, through your worship, just answering the question, the wording that was brought forward by Councillor Morgan clarifies it for me. It's based on what I had indicated to you at council when we were meeting a few weeks ago. In terms of the service review concept, that has been around for a while, and we put that into the whole multi-year budget process. And as you know, we're undertaking 3 service reviews at this point. And there are a number of other areas that we're looking at in terms of gaining efficiency, but those are not necessarily getting out of service or reducing expenditures that way. We are looking for efficiencies. We are looking for ways to eliminate costs over time, and also to create capacity within the organization. We're constantly doing that, and we're using various methods at our disposal. We call those service reviews, we also call them Lean Six Sigma. There's a whole raft of areas that we're looking at.
Councillor Kaibaga.
Through you, Chair, just a question to staff. So if this motion was not there, sorry, the amendment that I moved forward and was seconded and was voted on, does that, which also was my understanding that that's the direction that you guys were looking for, because I asked a couple times before, and a couple of people mentioned that staff is looking for direction, and that was the idea behind the motion. And and you've mentioned that there's already a review underway in housing, in City Golf, and there's a third one. I can't remember which one you said, but does that change if the motion is no longer there? Does the reviews that are happening right now, that are currently underway, do they continue, or is there a change that's going to happen? And then I can wrap up after that.
Ms. Barbon?
Thank you, through the chair. So without this, no, that is correct, that the work that we're currently undertaking does not change. This would be in addition to the 3 that we are already and currently bringing forward for council's consideration.
Councillor Kaibaga?
Thank you. So that's very clear to me, which is when I put the motion forward was to respond to the comments that were around the table. Many times it was mentioned, staff is looking for direction, and we gave them that direction. And if it's my understanding that that direction is not needed, and there's already some reviews that are happening right now, I'm completely happy to remove my motion if my seconder is okay with that. But the purpose of the motion was not to bring any confusion. It was to to allow staff to continue the review that they're already undertaking. And they seem to have that need because it was mentioned a couple of times that staff is looking for direction. And they said it a couple of times in the discussion that we're having on the horseshoe here, that they were looking for direction and nobody was getting up to give that direction. And that's why I put my motion forward, because I was in support of the reviews that are underway right now. So if that motion is not needed, I'm happy to take it off the floor.
Thank you, Councillor Carabag. I might mention, as that happened at committee, we're now dealing with amendments here to the motion that's been placed, so we are not in a position to withdraw that from this discussion. But I'll turn to Councillor Turner if I can, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is getting confusing. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Helmer's comments. I agree with what Councillor Morgan's attempt here is to do as well. I would support what Councillor Morgan is doing, but I would vote to defeat the overall motion once that was put forward. Where I think maybe there might be opportunity here, though, is we find ourselves in a bit of a pickle to the tune of about $4 million right off the hop from costs that have been downloaded to us by the province. If this motion were to be focused towards figuring out how we could upload $4 million worth of services to the province, I'd be all for that. And I think that might, I mean, well, it may just. I mean, that's not without precedent. There have been circumstances where the province did download in a previous government, and municipalities sought to exit services that they thought that the province was best suited to provide. And that might be an avenue worth pursuing as well. But as it stands right now, what's being put forward here, I would support Councillor Morgan's amendment. I will vote to defeat the Clause F overall at the time that comes forward.
So noted. Councillor Squire.
I've already spoken once, but I am the second to the motion. I've also, and I'm going to be perfectly blunt here, I think for me, I've been put in a confusing and difficult situation because I find it unusual that council made a decision, or we made a decision as SPPC. Now we're being asked to change it in a way that frankly is saying, if I understand it correctly, what's going to be coming back to us is not so much a service review as a full pulling the hair out of the scalp, meaning elimination of a service, which means we're not going to look at finding efficiencies in other areas. It's going to be all elimination or nothing. I have no idea what we're debating anymore. I have no idea what's coming back. This has not been helpful to me, and I'm going to stay where I am.
Thank you. Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, Your Worship. It is complex. So I'm just going to throw my 2 cents in here. I applaud Councillor Carabag for putting this motion forward. I think it's precisely because we're seeing some downloading that we need to do an exercise like this, because we're going to have challenges as we try to meet our target of 2.7. And to me, the city manager's office, if they go to the chair of our budget committee and request precise wording, I feel that we should support him in getting clear direction, especially if the chair, after consultation, agrees with that motion. So I will be supporting this amendment.
Any other comments before I ask Councillor Morgan for a wrap on this? Deputy Mayor, I know you've spoken on this issue. Is it a question to staff?
No, I just need to clarify, because it's come up a couple of times in the meeting. We're not actually talking about it, so I'm not disclosing an interest, but on the matter of the City of London's golf courses, my father works for the National Golf Course Owners Association. He is actually the revenue manager for that organization, and we are a member here at the City of London. So I just wanted to declare that part, because if we do start talking about that, I'm going to have to recuse myself from the discussion. What's actually in front of us, I think, is fine.
Well, I hope you're a scratch golfer, Deputy Mayor. I am not. Councillor Morgan, unless there are any other comments? Councillor Morgan, a wrap.
Yes, well, if there was a need to clarify, I think it's become evident through the debate what actually happened at committee, which is what I'm trying to do today. It was very clear that the discussion that we entered into at committee was about having a process for council to bring forward ideas that may result in the reduction or elimination of services or even modification to funding and that sort of thing. This is not staff coming up with a giant list. This is about a process that we are going to engage in as council and SPPC, that no decisions have been made at this time. Service reviews is a term we use to review services and that we're undergoing. What we're talking about here is a council-initiated discussion about the types of things that we may want to consider for reduction or elimination. This will be a council-driven process that staff will then go and gather information on and bring back into the multi-year budget process, where we will make decisions on it or not. The types of things on that list will be part of the discussion with the staff direction at SPPC by putting it on a future agenda. But we should be very clear what we're talking about. We're not talking about the same service review process that we've gone into. We're talking about reduction or elimination or other options to reduce the pressure on the budget. We may choose to add things. We may have that meeting and choose to add nothing. But I think we should be very clear on what that meeting is going to be about. But let's be clear, it'll be a council-driven process. Council will make the decisions. Staff are not going to bring forward a whole bunch of items. They are going to support us in that by perhaps bringing a suite of services that we could consider, but we are going to make the decisions and have the discussions. We can add things through that process. That is what this motion is trying to clarify. That is what the discussion at committee is, and that was the intent of committee, and I'm just looking to clarify that. So I hope you support this. As Councillor Turner mentioned, the amendment, even if you don't support the process, which you could clearly vote against after it's been amended.
Colleagues, we have on our secondary screen the actual motion as moved by, the amendment is moved by Councillor Morgan, seconded by Councillor Lewis. There are no other questions or comments, so I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 10-4.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Helmer. Back to you on the overall amendment. Motion is amended.
Well, I think the way that it's been amended, perhaps somebody else should move it, since I'm not going to support it.
Councillor Morgan moves, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Comments or questions? We've had a pretty good hash of the others, so I'll look for any new or additional comments that might be useful or helpful for this purpose. Councillor Sally.
I won't be long, just no, won't be supporting it.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you. I did have an idea for this process, but I've already shared it with staff, although I hope colleagues can come up with some things we can remove.
So noted. Any other comments or questions? Then I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 9-5.
Thank you. Anything else, Deputy Mayor Helmer?
I'll put the rest of 4.1 on the floor and see if that generates any discussion.
Any comments or questions? 4.1, as in the rest of it. Seeing none, then I will call the question. Turn your attention to the screen.
Councillor Hillier. Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Deputy Mayor Helmer. I think that's it. Thank you very much for that. In a moment, we will look to the 11th report of council in closed session. As I look to the newly seated Councillor Lewis to present the report, please. Oh, first, a move by Councillor Lewis. Is there a seconder for this? Councillor Van Meerbergen. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just wanted to make sure that I had the right report to report out on. The 11th report of the Council in closed session. Your Council in closed session reports. 1, that the Service Employees International Union, Local 1, Canada, full-time and part-time office workers bargaining unit, tentative agreement, that as a procedural matter pursuant to Section 239, bracket 6 of the Municipal Act 2001, the following recommendation be forwarded to the Council in closed session for the purpose of considering whether the recommendation should be forwarded to City Council for deliberation and a vote in public session. That on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Services, and Chief Human Resources Officer, the Memorandum of Agreement concerning the 2019 to 2022 collective agreement for Service Employees International Union Local 1 Canada, bracket full-time and part-time workers bargaining unit, bracket, be ratified.
If there's a mover and a seconder, any comments or questions? Then I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Councillor Van Holst. Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. There are no deferred matters, no inquiries that I've been made aware of, nor emergent motions. So, colleagues, I will turn your attention to the bylaws. We are going to break this down and exclude 198, vote on that separately. So what I will be doing is looking for a mover and seconder for the introduction and first reading of bills 182 through 197. Is there a mover? Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Thank you. We call the vote.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Thank you. I'll look for a mover and seconder for second reading of bills 182 through 197. Moved by Councillor Van Meerbergen, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Thank you, colleagues. I'll look for mover and seconder of third reading and enactment of bills numbers 182 through 197 inclusive. Moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hillier. We call the vote.
Councillor Squire. Closing the vote and the motion carries 14-0.
Colleagues, Bill 198 refers to 2096 Wonderland Road North, I'll look for a mover and seconder for the introduction and first reading of Bill 198. Moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Call the vote.
Councillor Van Holst. Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-1.
Colleagues, I'll look for mover and seconder of Bill 198. Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll turn your attention to the screen as we vote.
Councillor Squire. Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-1.
Thank you. And finally, colleagues, I'll look for mover and seconder for third reading and enactment of Bill 198. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Hillier. Turn your attention to the screen, please, as we vote.
Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Turner. Closing the vote and the motion carries 13.
And finally, colleagues, I'll look for a mover and seconder to adjourn the meeting. Moved by Councillor Van Meerbergen, seconded by Councillor Turner. You on the screen? Then I'm going to do a hand vote. All those in favor? Abstained? Carried. Thank you very much, colleagues. We are done.